So I'll run through the intro again. My name is Justin. I work at Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, designing technology for new exhibits. I don't get to use Touch Designer a ton in my work, but my background is audio and doing live music performance. And this was a tool that popped on my radar almost a decade ago. Seeing a couple concerts that were made with it and not knowing that it was Touch Designer at first, but just going, whoa, how, why, how? This is fascinating. And what I was seeing was acts using the stage as kind of a playground and an instrument in itself. And that was really cool to me. So eventually I found out that it was Touch Designer. And what Touch Designer is an interactive, interoperable, multimedia powerhouse that lets you kind of program up your own ways of interacting with things without necessarily having to be a programmer. So it's made by this company called Derivative out of Montreal. And if you look on their site, you see there's just the features that they aim towards. So you can projection map, and you can see, this was one of the early shows that I saw was Amon Tobin's ISAM show. And this is just a gigantic structure of cubes made out of like scrim screen and piping basically. And then there's just all these great projection mapped pieces on a very complex piece, and then he's performing in this middle cube there. So you can do polar projection mapping on a sphere or a planetarium, which is actually something I want to do. I want to mess with the planetarium at the museum, and I'm hoping to use Touch Designer to do that. Do real-time 3D and compositing. This is great for messing with 2D graphics. Even if you're just playing around, you can design visuals in 2 dimensions or create 3-dimensional objects and manipulate them in all sorts of ways, just from within the program to manipulating them with a Kinect or your webcam or a MIDI controller. You can have audio reactive visuals. And one of the cool things about this is, I think where the name Touch Designer came from initially was they were designing it to work with touch interfaces. So you could have, you could build your own application that you design the elements of. You can put your sliders wherever you want. And you can combine all these things. So you could have a performer on stage who's controlling visuals with their movements through a Kinect or just through the video of them. And you could be back behind the desk controlling color, which visual patch is playing, things like that. So you can use it for VJing, you can use it for a more involved performance. And my take on this comes from kind of a live performance thing, but you can use it for art installations, you can use it for permanent installs. It's interoperable with so many things that I'll show you. There's a pretty deep integration with Ableton Live now. It has web interfaces, so you could be pulling data from a web API and using that to control the visuals. One of the experiments I was working on was doing a model of the Earth, just having a sphere, and taking a little 3D model of the International Space Station, and then pulling latitude and longitude from NASA, because they have a constantly updating just 2 data point API of the location of the International Space Station, and then you can use that to position it around the sphere. Aside from that, you've got Kinect, you've got It Speaks Network Video, NDI, different languages like that. OSC, which is like updated MIDI, runs over a network. You can set your own endpoints, you can set your own definitions for what each command does, and you can get like an iPad app that sends out OSC. Ableton doesn't, but you can through Max MSP built into Ableton. It speaks DMX, ArtNet, Dante. These are all like stage lighting protocols. So you can have your stage lights sync to the video content. So you can have it sample the colors from the VJ content that you're playing and control the lights accordingly. MQTT, so you could be taking data over the network from like an ESP32 or Arduino, like sensor data from anywhere. You'd be taking temperature sensors and changing the light color based on that. Basically, the idea with Touch Designer is you've got basically any type of input you could want, all this processing engine in the middle, and then any type of output you want. That's kind of the dream, you know? So that's a lot of fun to me. Here's some examples of using light and maybe using a Connect there to create a visual. So the first show that I saw that did this was the
where Trent basically pushes the button.
And they had 2 layers of screens. They had a front LED screen that comes down and goes back up. You could do effects like that. And this was just the mind-blowing thing that got me to. And again, doing, you can build a custom interface so the people behind the mixing desks are using these apps that they've built just for the specific show. And they've got song cues and different lighting cues that they can use from a touchscreen interface. And then, of course, when you get into lighting, there's so much stuff. It's using depth cameras. Let's see. Click through.
Does it have a way to support, or does it have a DMX library? Like,
Have a what?
does it have a fixture library for DMX, or a way to do that?
Yeah, it has a library for DMX. You're still basically speaking serial in a way, but there's ways to talk to it directly. Like you can just send color data out, but when you start talking about like moving headlights and things like that, you gotta kind of tweak it. So here's some motion tracking being used in the test phase and then being used on stage to control the visuals. So that's really cool. It's like creating a connect boundary in the front part of the stage, so when you lean forward, the visuals cut around you, and using light tracking to kind of paint on the LED screen using just a handheld spotlight, and then tracing particle systems around with you. Yeah. So one of the coolest effects I saw with this was the interactivity, because the lights interacting with you is cool in one way. So for this one, we'll click through, they use the back screen on the stage as a 4-channel drum sequencer. And then they're kind of using this as a
type of touch instrument. So we developed a semi
So the drummer was walking across
screen,
the back of the
which,
stage and using, basically using a connect boundary as kind of a wheel of fortune, tap these notes in, and you can see the sequencer running as it's going through. And that to me was really awesome, just seeing that live, like programming a giant drum machine the size of the stage. Was just an amazing thing. And really all it is MIDI that's being set through Touch Designer and back to a drum sequencer, probably in Ableton. Not exactly sure, but.
Rotate the whole thing.
So another one that's huge here is deadmau5's Cube, which is on an entire motorized pan and tilt and rotate so that it can open and close. And then all these visuals are being run live. And he has a channel in Ableton that actually goes back and tells the visuals what to do. So you can trigger these cues with it. Some good example of like content running across these screens. And you don't have to do serious content with it. You can be absolutely silly, of course. So that's great visual potential. it can't compete with like Unreal or Unity, especially Unreal, in terms of creating like complex 3D environments. So one of the other coolest things I've seen is Childish Gambino did a mini tour with this giant dome.
300.
And they did 360 projection mapping in the entire dome. And this is Unreal being used for the visuals. So each song basically has its own video game level as an environment, which is super cool. But that's kind of beyond what you can do with the visuals in Touch Designer, but Touch Designer is very involved here. So what's happening is Unreal is generating the environments, but they did previs in VR so they could map things to the dome before installing, because that would be a huge thing to install for development. So Touch Designer's here. It's basically driving the show. It's sending commands to Unreal so they can move through it like a video game level. And then it's doing color sampling, and it's controlling all the lighting, the lasers. It has a couple different laser interfaces, ILDA and Ether Dream, I believe it is. Lasers are expensive. I don't get to play with them nearly as much as I'd like, so. But I mean, the overall thing, and the guy in the back just controlling it with a MIDI controller and playing the entire venue this size as a video game is just astoundingly cool, so. Those are some ideas of what it's capable of. So just going into Touch Designer, when you open it, it gives you a little demo file. And you've got your palette over here, which is basically a bunch of pre-built components that help you do things more quickly, and you can add your own. Got my own little component library here. But we'll get to some of those later. I'm just gonna go ahead and close it, and you can reopen it. This little second button right here. The interface is small, and contrast ratio is not great for vision impairment, but there's not a whole lot I can do about that, so we'll just press on with that. So what you have here, and what keeps this a little more visual and intuitive than, say, using programming languages to put these things together, is a node-based interface. You've probably seen these before: MaxMSP, Pure Data, even Node-RED for JavaScript. Node-based is really cool because it gives you functions as you would have in code, but as a block. So it's more Legos than having to dig deep down into code. Now the cool thing is, of course, this being like a professional application, you can code with it. The backend is all Python, so you can script all sorts of complex things within Python, but you don't have to know it to get started. And of course, if you Google recipes for what you want to do, there's actually a lot more documentation out there than there was a decade ago, so there's probably a YouTube video, or Matthew Reagan writes a lot of blog posts. There's probably something to get you close to what you're looking to do. So that's fantastic. And of course, just being one class, this is going to be kind of a blast through a lot of features, and obviously not going to cover everything, but it should give you enough to start playing around and make something interesting, get an idea of the different engines involved. So each one of these nodes in Touch Designer parlance is called an operator, and there's different types of operators, and you see if you click on them and highlight, and over here on the right is the parameter window. So each one has its own types of parameters. So what we're looking at here, if you hit tab, you'll get your operator menu, create operators, and you'll see these are just for graphics, for 2D graphics, and there's a ton. So so if you tab, you can actually keep tabbing through, so you can get to the type you want. And you can also, it automatically drops your cursor in the search. So I'll hit tab, and I'll tab over to tops, which is texture operators, and I'll just say null, hit enter. And of course, you can click and delete. Control Z to undo, Control C, Control V, your usual shortcuts apply, copy, paste. I think I'm shaking the camera a bit too. Cool. So we can walk through what's going on in this little demo file. So we have a movie file in, which is actually just a static image. So if you want to bring an image or a movie file into it, you would use the movie file in top. And tops are texture operators, and textures, when you're talking about graphics, are two-dimensional. So pictures, movie files, colors. If I say constant, you've got this. You can just create a constant color. If I say ramp, you've got gradients that you can make. If you hold down your right mouse button and drag, that's how you select. If you hold your left mouse button and drag in the empty area, it actually pans through your network, and scroll wheel scrolls in and out. So if I hold right click and drag, I can select multiple operators, just hit delete and get rid of those. So you got your texture operators, it's 2D. If I hit tab, chops are channel operators, and that's any sort of kind of numerical data. Audio counts as that. So if I say like audio file in, you'll see that kind of things that are like waveforms or numerical data. A constant in chop land would basically be a number. And you think that would be weird to do, but it's basically a variable. If you're familiar with programming, basically everything in here acts like a variable of some kind or another. So chops usually occupy this space of doing movement, numbers, or audio. They also pull in different data, like your connect chop would actually be the numbers. When you're using a connect, if you raise your right arm, it will say like right arm, and we'll have like a 0 to 1 float that's from the bottom of its capture area to the top. So you could actually just grab those directly and say like, I want right arm to control this and left arm to control this. Next up are surface operators called SOPs, and those are 3D objects. So if I say box, it doesn't look like much, but what's going on is you've got a cube here. You've got spheres, you've got all sorts of things to modify them. Tabbing over, mats or materials, and that's basically the material that you apply to a 3D object. So we'll get to that later. DATs are data, which is kind of similar to chops, but this is where you would say, you would grab a web source in or a table, which would basically be, rows and columns, a spreadsheet. So this is where you would pull data into your program in one way or another from any external source, or when you're writing blocks of Python code, you would use DATs for that. So you take like a script DAT, and this is where you would write your code, and it already pre-populates kind of the loopbacks within Touch Designer. So hit tab again, customs, installable plugins that are written in C++. There's not a whole lot out there really that I've seen, but and tabbing back around to the front, comps are compositions. So it's things that have multiple acting parts in them, but also when you're doing 3D, doing things in 3D space like SOPs, you're going to need a camera, a light source, and a geometry to kind of render that into 2D space. So we'll get to that. But this is also where you have like your containers. So once you have a block of code that's kind of standalone, like I'll just highlight all of this. I want to highlight the chop too there. And I can cut. And you can go into a container by double clicking, or you can actually just scroll into it. So you can nest your projects accordingly. And you see up here at the top, we'll say it's project 1/container1. So it's kind of like web addresses where you just have this hierarchy. So I'm going to hit U to go back up, and I can hit I to go in. So just kind of up and in is U and I because they're next to each other. But I can go in, I can paste this. You can drag the network to get this back here. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit P to close the parameter window so we can take a good look at this. So you see what we've got going on. We've got this image file that has jelly beans in it right now. That's cool. And you can see our output here. We've got this kind of wavy thing going on, right? So how are we creating these waves? So we've got a noise chop that's creating random numbers. And you can kind of see it's going between 0 and 1. You can scroll in and kind of look at these graphs as they go. And so what we're doing here, and this is the fun thing about Touch Designer, is numbers don't have to stay numbers. You can turn numbers into textures. You can turn a 3D shape into a numerical list of the points that make it up. So what we've got here is our first type conversion. We're taking this noise channel operator that's creating random numbers between 0 and 1, and we're turning it into one row of noise with a chop to top. And you can see that those random numbers are mapping out between 0 and 1 as like white to black. And if we were to go into the parameters, I can actually probably stretch this out. Oh, well, we'll skip that for now. All right. So then what we have is a displace, and that's our first like modifier, like an effect. And what we're doing is we're feeding the image into the first input of displace. And everything in this node-based interface, it kind of goes from left to right. Like inputs are on the left, outputs are on the right. So we've got our image, and we're sending it out through this cable to the source image input of our displace. And then we're taking this random noise turned into a color palette, and we're feeding that into the displace image. And so what we're getting is a vertical distortion that's based on the random amount between black and white. And if I click on this, you'll see the parameters that we have here. You've got your displace weight. You know, basically, each operator has its own parameters that are based on what it does. So we can see like source midpoint. So we're kind of going from the center here, and since we're seeing that it's only going vertically, you can see on the x-axis we have 0 displacement, and on the y-axis we have like 0.1. If I were to just click in this field and say 0.5, see now we're getting more displace. Another good way to do this is if you hold down your left mouse button on a field, it actually pops up with this nice little range. So I can say like, we'll hover over 0.1, and then I'll just start moving the mouse left and right. And it actually just kind of turns these fields into a knob, which is super handy.
How did you do that? You highlight it?
You just hold down the mouse button over a numerical field.
Oh, okay.
And then you can,
Oh, I see.
you kind of go up and down, like if you want to do it by tens place, and then you go left or right from there. It can be a little fidgety at first, but you get used to it, and it's not too bad. Then we're going through a geo, which I'm not sure why, because it doesn't really do anything in this context. So it's going through a geo for no particular reason other than to just kind of apply that surface to to a shape, or apply that texture to a shape rather. And you'll see what I'm doing here is there's little flags along the left side and along the bottom, and this last flag here in the corner is viewer active. So when you click that, it lets you manipulate what's inside the viewer. So in the case of a 3D shape, it's like that. When you're using this, not so much. You can hit H to home things if you get lost. Like if I'm left clicking and dragging around, I can rotate through the shape. If I right click and drag, you can pan around. Of course, scroll. And if you click down the scroll button, you can use up and down too. scroll it as well. But if I get all lost and lose the thing, you can just hover over it, hit H, and it homes it. So I'll turn that viewer off. And you'll see I can do the same thing. Turn the viewer on. I can adjust the range of the graph. That'll become more useful later. And then we're going to the output here. So I'll show you the next flag that's next to it. The blue one right here is display, and that adds your background. So if you want to see a bigger version of what you're working on, or kind of keep your final output over to the right and just kind of have that going. So as I mess around with things, you can just see at the end on a bigger display. You can also resize these operators, the same as resizing anything else. You kind of want to keep a standard size, because if you start resizing things all at random, it's going to get messy really quick. And these networks can get complex, so things do get messy really quick. I can just hit Control-Z and we'll bring those back to normal. And if I click on the movie file in, you'll see our parameters here, your file input. So I'll click plus, and that'll let me pick. These are the pre-built images that will drop you in this folder, just the ones that come with it. You can do the same thing. Now we're looking at the demo images. I can go to the nature folder and grab a video of a nature scene. That's a little too wavy. But let's say I want to bypass this for a second. So looking at these flags on the left, we can turn off the viewer. And what's really cool about this node-based interface is, you can have something going through 8 different steps, and it will give you visual feedback of what's happening in every step. So if something gets unruly, or like you don't know why the image looks like that or the data looks like that, you can kind of look back through your network and see where it got weird. But imagine you have 100 of these things running and your computer is processing an output for each one and having to display that to the scene. By the way, your frame rate's right up here, FPS. We're at 60 FPS. It tries to lock to that. But yeah, if you have 100 different viewers rendering at once, that becomes an issue. So you can highlight multiple operators, and you can just click that viewer active, and it will just turn them all into just kind of letter, acronym representations of what they are. But I can turn this back on for now, because we only have 5 or 6. But going back to, let's say you want to get rid of this displace, but you don't want to delete it because your network is wired in. This arrow right here will just bypass right through it. Sorry, I have all of them highlighted, so it's going to bypass all of them. Just click the displace and bypass, and now we're just letting it flow through, and you'll see that arrow there indicating that it's flowing through. Clone immune is this a little more advanced. That's when you're doing a replicator to, like, say, for every video file, generate this network. So we won't really get to that today. I'll undo the bypass. And let's say you want to just kind of lock this image in place. You have a lock here, which won't look like much because we still have the displace on. But that will save the last frame. So if you're sending somebody a demo file, or you want to replace the file later, but you just want this kind of temporary thing in place, it will just hold that last frame, and it will actually save with the file. So when you hit unlock, it actually loses that frame. It's just kind of a frame buffer. Not something you'll use a whole lot. The most things you'll use is you'll want to display, and you can display multiples and kind of do this, and it'll just lay out accordingly. You want to activate your viewer for grabbing data and for looking around in 3D space, using your background and using bypass. Those are the most common flags you'll be using. So I'm going to start in on this kind of 2D space, and we'll look at compositing and like manipulating some images just for the fun of it. So I'm just gonna right click and drag, select our whole network and hit delete. And since that's the pre-built one, you can come back to it by just restarting Touch Designer. So you can hit tab, or you can just double click in blank space to get your op create dialog. So I'm gonna go to tops, and we will start with a movie file in, similar to the last one. And we have a banana. This is the kind of preload with all the graphic stuff. So you just see a lot of demos with bananas. Don't know why. That's just what they put in there. It's banana for scale, right? And you'll see that if you're familiar with Photoshop at all, you know that checkerboard background means it's a transparent background. So it definitely allows transparencies. You'll see a lot of similar things from Photoshop or After Effects if you've dealt with any of those, because we are in the graphic space. So there's a lot of things of like compositing basically works the same that you'd recognize from other places. Something with a transparent background can be overlaid with, go back and get those jelly beans. So I'll click over here in the parameters, this little plus. I'm gonna go back up to that parent folder, grab the jelly beans, cool. This is high art that we're doing here. Yes, get the jelly beans. And so you see, we've got our outputs here. These operators are just standing alone. So I'm gonna right click on the output, and that will let you add another operator that's already pre-wired to it. So I'm going to click composite, or you can just type comp, and it's the only one that starts with comp. If you type something where there's like two, I don't know why the other render didn't, oh well. Like if I type movie, you'll see we've got both movie file in and out. If you hit enter at that point, it can lead to some, it might not select the one that you want. It usually selects the last one in alphabetical order, but I've noticed that to not be very consistent. But what I do a lot when I'm just doing this is I'll just type comp, hit enter, and I'll get a composite. And we've already got our first error. You see the red X here. You'll also see like a yellow yield sign if there's something that you should be aware of, something that it's not seeing, but it's not stopping it from processing. The red X means something is stopping it from processing. So we'll just click on that, and we get a little pop-up here that says error, not enough sources specified. What a composite is for mixing signals. So we only have one signal going through here, and I think it should actually just work anyway. Yeah. So we're seeing this big error message, but it's still just putting through the one file. That's fine. But not enough sources because this is supposed to mix signals. So I can click on the output of our operator right here. And you don't have to click and drag. You can click and drag, but you can also just click and go anywhere. So I'm just going to drop this in, and the way composite works is you can have more than two. So copy and paste. So when it looks like that, you can put in as many operators as you want. Some of them are only two. Just depends on what you're working with. So I've put our banana and our jelly beans into composite, and we have a jelly bean covered banana. So that's one thing. So I'm going to click on composite and take a look at this. The main thing that you'll see is operations, right? This is multiply. This works just like multiply in Photoshop. Say minimum, there's different modes. There's tons and tons of different modes. So the common one is multiply, and you'll see this background is still transparent because all the pixels outside of the banana are multiplying by 0. If there's nothing there, it's multiplying by 0, so we still have a transparent background. So I'm going to click on add, and you see now we've got this kind of mix where the two are brighter because pixel math is still just additive. You're just adding numbers, like each color, red, green, blue, is like a 0 to 255, or really it's 16-bit here, but we'll just say it's a number range, and if you're adding, you kind of add brightness on. So I'm going to say over, and that overlays it. So now we have the banana on our background. Yeah. Now the first spot where the middle mouse button becomes really useful, or the most useful case for it, if I mouse over an operator and click the middle mouse button, it just gives me this entire info panel. You can see the amount of render time. So if something starts slowing down your frame rate, you can start, you'll get a feel for which operators are resource hogs, but you'll see this takes like 0.9 milliseconds to render just fine. But you'll see the size here too. And with the free license of Touch Designer, you're limited to 720p. And all these preset assets, all the assets that come with it, I think are just 720p. So, but you can see the pixel format, so we're 8-bit color. With different types of operators, you'll see different information that's relevant to it. So what I've done here at the end, I'll delete that and we'll go back to it. Best practice when you're building this is when you've got your little spider web of things here, and what you want is kind of a final product of each part, because you can have multiple chains of operators that are each doing one specific thing. And what we want is like one clean output that even if we change things in the middle, like if I change just composite to an over top instead, which is the same, it's still a composite, but what we're doing is we're using slightly less memory because we're only doing over. So it's just kind of a shortcut. Yeah.
Does it matter the order that you have things stacked, like which goes into the top part of the composite?
With the composite,
which
yeah.
goes in the bottom, like?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Is it doing the background because that's on the bottom?
It is, yeah. So when you're using over, and there's a couple ways to do this. If you click on the composite, the question is, does the order of the inputs matter? So if I do multiply, it doesn't care because multiplication is, what's the word for that, Nandini? Multiplication is the same backwards and forwards? Commutative, that's the one. Yeah, but when you're overlaying something, of course, the top layer matters. So there's a couple ways to change this. And one is right in the parameters. You'll see that we have our movie file in 1, and these are the title bars down here. You can change the names. So we'll say banana, and I will move down here, and we'll just double click that, say jelly beans. So now when I click on comp, you'll see we have our 2 layers, and there's an up arrow on all of them except for the top one. So if I hit up on jelly beans, now jelly beans, because it doesn't have any transparency, is just covering the banana. And you'll see likewise when you do that, these wires switch. So as I do that, not everything has that like the composite though, but what you can do is you can kind of click this in between. When you hover over it, it pops into the separate ports. So if I click this and do that, you kind of get an S shape sometimes. There you go. Hit undo, Control Z. Also, I mean, you can just right click, disconnect. So there's several ways to do it. So what we're seeing so far, you're just kind of seeing these static wires. What I want to show is a nice indication of what's happening. So I'm going to take our jelly beans, and I'm just going to pull in a video file. And now you'll see on these wires, it's subtle, but there's like a little bit of pixel movement. You'll see when things are flowing, when it's video or data or something, you'll see flow through these wires. So that's a good visual indication of things that are happening. I'm gonna hit undo because we already named it jelly beans, so we'll just leave it there. Another thing is these aren't limited to one input or out. Well, inputs are limited by the operator type. Some accept multiple inputs, some don't. Like if I look at over, this is strictly limited to 2. We've got source 1 and source 2, and these will work the same as this, as you might imagine. But if you click on the output port of these, you can send as many outputs as you want anywhere. They're not exclusive to one, so we can just do that. So I'm going to Control-Z, undo that, and show you another thing. So if I right-click and drag to highlight these both, and just click on either output port, won't work in that case. Sometimes it does. I think it has to have a shared output port for that to work. Let's try that. Or input port, I'm sorry. There we go. If you have a shared input port, then you can do that. Since this has 2 separate values, it won't let you drag multiples in. Just a little shortcut. Another thing you're seeing here is you notice that this one is already kind of cut to 720p because we generated it from this. And since I created this separately, it already just kind of had this square viewer. I'm going to create another over just to show you. Of course, it has no sources, so it's giving that error. But if I do the middle mouse click and look at the info, and if you don't have a middle mouse button, it's a little less convenient, but over here in the parameters, the I will give you that info. But you'll see it's defaulting because it doesn't have, it's not inheriting from any video sources. So right now it's saying 128 by 128. So it's got the square aspect ratio. But as soon as we drag a video into it, it will adopt or inherit the parameters of the file before it. And just a convenient thing you can do is if you just hover a corner and just click, it will automatically fix the aspect ratio. So we can do that here. I'm just going to go ahead and delete this extra one. Oh, didn't like that. There we go. So we can leave our over as is. And I'm just going to pick my composite, and we'll just, another fun thing you can do is just hit this preview grid. You can get a preview of all the different modes, although it doesn't tell you when you hover over what it is. But we'll just,
how did you do that? The preview?
Preview grid, so if you click on composite, and there's just these switches, so hit preview grid, gives you an idea. But I'll just, hit my operations, we'll say like hard mix, usually gives you something fun, or I'm just picking at random. Screen. Stencil luminance, that's fun. Say chroma difference, so there's a fun one. So let's say that we wanted to make the most basic VJ setup ever, right? So I've got a couple different versions here. And if you're like DJing or VJing, you might be familiar with the Crossfader, so we're just cutting between different signals. So we're just going to double click out here. I'll say cross. And I'll highlight both of these, right click and drag, click one of the outputs, and it's only going to do one, of course. There we go. So if I click on Crossfader, the only parameter we get here is literally a crossfader. So we can cut across both of these and it blends in between. Right? So I'm going to turn off my viewer here. And like I was saying, if you want to have something clean at the end of the network that you can reference without it changing, like say I don't want the crossfader to be the last step anymore, I want to do some more post-processing, I'm just going to click out here, double click or hit tab. I'm going to type in null. And a null basically just copies whatever goes into it. It doesn't do anything. You'll see there's just no options at all. All it does is copy. But in this case, let's say, I'm going to click the output of my crossfader and bring it into null. So I'll just click this to fix the aspect ratio. I'll make this my viewer, so that'll give us the nice endpoint. And now it'll just do the same thing as you'd expect. But now if I want to add, I'll add another operator in between. Say I have this referenced, or I have this, if you right click and click view, say I have this output on my projector screen and I'm messing with it here. You know, that way I wouldn't have to change the source at the end. So you can insert, and you can just kind of click and drag and move, so we can insert on either channel here. But I'm going to right click on the wire before the null and click insert operator, and that'll drop it right in line with what's already happening. So I'm going to pick a level, and level has these several tabbed pages of options. So this is the pre-processing. There's an invert here, so if I do that, slide invert through, change the black level, brightness, gamma, you know, pretty typical adjustments of graphic stuff, probably still familiar to Photoshop. A good one here is opacity. So if we're layering it with something else, or we're even doing a feedback loop, which I'll show you later, you want to turn down the opacity a little bit so it's not just adding on top of itself forever. But so this gives us a couple things to play with here. We can do invert. I'll right click in here again, insert operator, we'll say blur. Again, does about what you expect. Pre-shrink filter. You know, each thing has its own options. And so along with this, in the parameter panel, along with this I for info, you'll see two question marks. The one with the yellow and blue background is the Python reference. So once you get to the coding, you know, to the point where you're coding things, if I click this, it just pops right up in the browser and gives you all the classes and members for programming it, you know, interacting with it with Python. But since we're not there, the regular question mark for any operator just brings you right to the documentation page for it, and you can just scroll down and it explains each parameter in varying amounts of detail. Some are not as well documented as others, but all your basic stuff like this will be pretty well documented. Some of the new experimental features will just kind of have a sentence on it. So I can just click and delete blur, and it will leave that wire in between, so we still have it wired to our null. So we've got a little basic graphics workflow. It's nothing fancy, obviously. Just right-clicking, kind of rearranging, cleaning things up, and scrolling out so I can pull it out of the way. So we can, of course, click through and just use these parameters in here to control things, but it's kind of cumbersome. So what I wanted to do is basically start automating parameters or doing something automatically. So I'm going to hit tab, and we're going to hit tab again to switch over to the chop menu, and you can also just click these, just like tabs. I'm going to click LFO, or you can just type LFO. And that's a low frequency oscillator. So if you're here for the audio class, you know, it's the exact same concept. This is just swinging between 1 and -1. And we've got some parameters here. So first of all, I'm going to slow down the frequency so we can get a better idea. If it's at 1, that's 1 hertz. So every 1 second, it will complete that cycle. You do, you know, 8 hertz faster. So I'm going to do, you know, about a quarter of a second, third of a second, let's say 0.34. So you can use the sliders. You can double click, or you can, you know, click and delete. I just double click so it highlights the whole thing. We'll say 0.4. The other thing is these sliders limit you to a range. You'll see this goes from 0 to 8. You can override that by just saying like 12. Eventually this gets really obnoxious, but I'm just going to hit undo a couple times, bring it back to 0.4. And you'll see what we've got here. We've got this, you know, 0 is the center point, so it goes 1 and -1. We can bring up that offset, let's say to 0.5. And, you know, so now we've got the center point at 0.5, but what we've still got is it's going 1.5 to negative 0.5. So I'm going to take the amplitude down, and that's how high the number goes. If I drag this up, now we're going negative 10 to 10. So I'm just going to bring this down to 0.52. And that'll get us at about 0 to 1. And you'll see, you know, we're kind of working in this. And now that I've, you notice when I brought the range to 10, it compressed the visual feedback here. So if I activate the viewer and right click on it, hit home, reset min-max. And now it'll kind of show you in a more reasonable way what's happening there. Another way to visualize what's happening with your moving data in these, I'm just going to right click and I'm going to add a trail. And that acts like an oscilloscope. So now you can see what's happening here. So we've got the sine wave. So if I go back and click on our LFO, I can change this to a triangle wave and you'll see how this interacts. Ramp wave, square wave will just kind of be on and off.
Oh, what's the viewer component called?
Trail.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a trail of what was happening there. And you see, like, chops have these two different ways of displaying data. It can be a little bit confusing. But basically, when you're looking at data on the graph like this isn't easily translatable to other functions. But, so I'm just going to delete this trail. I'm going to right click and do a chop to top just to show, oh, I'm sorry, doing this backwards. And you'll see here, you can't translate between types easily. Like I can't, this has inputs, but you can't get top input into a chop usually. Just like I can't take this number and apply it directly to an image. And that's why we have these color types. So, you know, the tops being purple, the green being chops, kind of helps you visually keep separate that these don't connect together directly. But what you can do is we can do that type conversion that we saw in the demo file earlier. So I'm going to right click on this and you'll see we've got all the chops that we can put into it. And you'll see that the ones that don't apply, like say my connect input is grayed out because you can't go directly into it. But anything I can go into, we've already got here. But if I click on tops, you'll see it's just reduced us down to the only tops that this will run into because we're going directly from that output. So I'm going to say chop to top, and you'll see how the square wave influences a color because we're moving from that numerical space to color space. So when we have a square wave, it just looks like black to white, right? And you'll see the same sort of output with a trail. So if I change this waveform, we just go back and we'll change it to a ramp waveform. See the same sort of thing as we're going from gray for some reason because that wave doesn't, I think the ramp wave has a different offset. It shouldn't, but it does. But take a triangle wave, you'll see we're kind of more smoothly going from black to white now. And you remember that's what we had in the displace before. Although since this is just a solid line, then it would just displace everything equally. Yeah. Oh, and the other thing you'll see is even though we connected that there, type conversions have this kind of dotted line, and you'll see the same sort of motion. We can see those pixels kind of shimmering through the pipe, but when you have a type conversion going on here, you've got this arrow through a dotted line that shows you things happening. just to kind of keep reinforce that you're not actually plugging the wires in. It's like you're sampling the numbers and turning it into color data. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete the trail. And we actually won't need the chop to top for this either. So I'm going to hit delete on that. Now, let's look at Crossfade. That'll keep it easy. So we just have this one thing from 0 to 1, right? And we want to control it automatically with this, with our LFO. And so you see what we have is, you'll see the number changing, and then chan1 is the name of the channel. Now, the channel operators can have multiple channels. If I click this, we can rename, I can just say Crossfade, and now the name of it is Cross. Now, if I just add a space and say another channel and hit enter, now we've got two, and they'll be together in this case. But you can have a whole bunch of different sources coming from one channel operator. So we've got our cross top here, and I want to just control this with the oscillator. You'll see without the viewer active, if I try to grab one of these channels, it won't work. So I'm going to click the viewer active flag at the bottom right. And now when I hover over these, you'll see these highlight green. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on cross again to get this cross parameter up here. And if I hover over cross and just click and drag, I can apply this. And you'll just hit chop reference. You hit current chop value, which will just take that number at that point in time. Export is similar to reference, but it's not as flexible. So unless you have a specific use case, I always just click chop reference. And now you'll see this is just being remotely controlled.
Can you do that step one more time?
Yeah, definitely. We'll run through that again. I'm hitting Control Z to undo. So we'll have what we want to manipulate selected so that the parameter is up in the window. Do you have your viewer active? Yeah, so you'll know the viewer's active because you can hover over these and they highlight green. So I'm going to click on cross and drag, and I'm just going to drop it at where I want it to go. And then it will just automatically pop up this little context menu, and we'll click reference. And now you can highlight and click and drag from these values. Seems a little fidgety at first, but
And then you pick which one of these options. There's export,
reference.
chop reference.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll see in a lot of cases export does the same thing. But was that? So I'm going to turn, and if your viewer is active, you can still select this to get to the parameters by clicking the title bar at the bottom. So otherwise, if you click this, it's not going to reselect it. It's just going to, I'm just going to deactivate this viewer. So let's click on this cross again, and we're seeing that it's kind of highlighted a little differently, and the number is blue now. But also when I hover over this parameter, you'll see a little plus sign on the left. So I'm going to click that. And you'll see what's actually happened by us dragging this over here is there's this little bit of Python code that references the op. So this is named LFO1. So that'll be that, and then the parameter in square brackets. So you'll see that's the cross parameter. So once you get to the point where you're coding things or you're doing Python, that gives you a good reference. So now you just want to see what's happening there, or especially when things start erroring out because you're going back and changing the names of things and suddenly things are broken. I think this is the good part about using reference instead of, I'm just going to rename this Crossfade. and you'll see now it's broken. And this is what it'll look like when the reference is broken. So click that, and we'll see, oh, okay, it's still named cross here, not crossfade. So you can click in this and you can fix it manually like that. Hit undo. Or we can just grab this, drop it in, and fix it. I think when you use an export, you can change the name. Export will let you change the name, but it's kind of better practice to keep your variables named consistently anyway. So, because this is harder to handle in code. Like, you can't reference something like this directly in code. So when you get more advanced, you'll want to use references directly because you'll want to stay consistent with that. And that way, of course, you can copy and paste code. I'm going to slow that down a little bit more. Keep it kind of smooth. And let's see what, say we want to do some invert too. Just going to double click and we'll take a look at some of the other chops. And you'll see there's all sorts of things like outside of the standard numerical sort of thing. Like, we've got an LFO, we've got envelopes, which, going back to like synthesis, there's a lot of similar things that you'll get with a synthesizer, because we're basically controlling things in a pattern, right? Like, we're getting a sine wave out of this, which is similar to something you do with a synthesizer in audio. I'm going to copy this LFO, paste it. I'm just going to do a quick example of another thing. You don't have to follow along, really. Add a trail here. So you have things like envelopes. So I'm using a square wave LFO just as a trigger for this envelope. And you'll see what that's basically doing is creating a thing that fades off. Like, the square wave hits, and when it drops, this kind of slows the output of it. Similarly, another thing I could do instead of that envelope, delete, is right click and I'll add a lag. And that kind of smooths out. I keep deleting this trail, but keep using it too. There we go. So what we've got is, and you've got multiple inputs on this trail, so I'm going to bring in our square wave too, so we can see what's happening with our square wave here. And this is what's happening with the lag. So if I click on the lag, I can change the amount. So these are, I can look at the lag value of up and down. So if I bring this to 0, you'll see it pops up instantly on this next one. But then it has like a smoothing of 0.2 seconds out. And you can, this is the units right here. You can choose samples, frames, seconds. So, I mean, it works in seconds in this case. I'm going to click and hold and just drag this up to like a second. And now you see you get like this nice smooth fade off. So I'm going to delete the trail because you can't pull, when you're looking at a graph like that, you can't pull like you can from here. So I'm going to add a null at the end just for good practice. That way, if we want to do anything else to the sound, or the graphics rather, I'm going to activate the viewer, click on cross, and we'll just chop reference. Now you see this like kicks instantly and fades out to the other version. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can manipulate this, just like using an audio synthesizer. And you'll see now I have 2 of these LFOs with the same names, and you definitely don't want that. it's bad practice. Because now you got, if you were to do anything with this one, now you have multiple variables with the same name, and that's just bad. So I'm just going to name this LFO channel, clicking on this, going to channel. I'm just going to name this invert. And what I'll want to do is apply that to the invert level here. But I want to kind of keep things clean. So I've got this null, and I'm just going to double click here and rename this modifiers. You could just call it whatever you like. And of course, again, we've broken the bond here. So I'm going to just do export for now. That keeps it easier. So I want this to be the place where all my modifier chops are coming into. So I'm going to right click on the wire before it, click insert operator, and do merge. And now I can click this and drag it there as well. Now you'll see that we've got all three of our variables in the same spot. And similarly, how I've adjusted the range here to make sure that we're only in positive numbers, I want to do with this other one, because the invert level 0 to 1 is still 0 to 1 and not a negative. So what I'm going to do is right click outside of our invert LFO and insert an operator. This time I'm going to say math. And math gives you a bunch of options. You can use multiple inputs with it. You can multiply them, switch the positive, negative. You can do square roots, and combine them additively, subtract, multiply, divide. You know, math operations. Pretty straightforward. Has a multadd tab, so you can pre-multiply it. Like we're still looking at 0. Oh, this actually is staying positive. Yeah, okay. Well, let's say this wasn't the amplitude 1 and see if it goes negative. There we go, okay. Yeah, so if I were to say like pre-multiply by 10, so any number that comes in is now being multiplied by 10, so we're seeing it go in a bigger range. Undo that. You can also just pre-add and post-add, so it's like just add 1 to everything. So that'd be one way to keep us above the negative numbers, above 0. That's a little messy. I'm going to 0 that back out, 0 everything else back out. So range here is an interesting one, and this is something that you'll use a lot, because you'll see when you start using different types of sensors, connector, anything like that, different devices have different ranges, usually based on kind of the bit resolution. Say if you've got a little Arduino sensor, it might spit out a number between 0 and 255, or 0 and 1024, or if you've got to connect with like 16-bit data, it could give you like 16 million, I think that math is wrong, but you know, you could have 16 million values, which will usually show up as a 0 to 1. That's a float, because you can have infinite, you know, numbers of decimal places to refine that. So what you end up having is like some devices will be giving you a value of 0 to 1, some will be giving you between 0 and 255, some will be giving you negative 1 to 1. You end up with all these different things. So let's think about how we would range those all into the place that we want. So what you can do with this range here is you could say from range and to range. So this is your input, and looking at this, we'll say, okay, it's negative 1 to 1. I'm going to type negative 1 in here. And then this output range is what it will put out. So it'll basically take that, okay, so that's 2, you know, negative 1, 0, and 1. And we're compressing that to a range of 0 to 1. Similarly, if you were, you know, If this were acting as 0 to 1 and we wanted it to be 255, we could just say 0 to 255, and now you've got this nice large range. So a lot of doing this is like working with different sensors and inputs and kind of massaging the numbers into a range that works for what you're doing. With a lot of the built-in stuff, what you end up with is this float value of 0 to 1. So I'm going to go back to 0 to 1 output range and -1 to 1 input range, and that'll keep us in the positives. Another way that you can do that is there's actually an advanced math chop. I'll just add that in for fun. It's called function. And function is just even more math. You got your square roots, you got trigonometry functions in here. I'm actually in the wrong one. This isn't what we want. But there's some more advanced math for you. Let's see, clamp. It is, limit. Limit is what we want. I was thinking clamp, but that's a different program. But what you can do, limit will keep you absolutely, like if we're looking at this now, we're seeing it's going a little over 1 because the input range is over what we told it. But let's say we want to strictly limit this to 1, because if some things that you're dealing with, the built-in operators are pretty fault tolerant. Like, our crossfader is 0 to 1. If you go over 1, it just thinks it's 1. It doesn't error out. But when you start dealing with data and routing things with Python, going outside of the range it expects could cause it to error or crash or give you a big red X in the middle of the operator. So I can hard limit this. We'll just say type and clamp. It also has loop and zigzag, which is kind of fun. It's like if it goes over, it loops back to the bottom of the range, or zigzag, if it goes over, it just kind of comes back in. We're just going to say clamp. And similarly, your minimum and maximum. So we'll say 0 and 1. You can also just click positive only. So now it strictly will not go over 1. And since that puts us at this little top range, I kind of just want to mess with the numbers on the LFO a little bit. Let's say we just want this to be like 0.95 or something. We'll just see if that kind of makes it smoother. Or maybe move the offset a little bit. Again, this is just kind of messing with numbers until you get it where you want it. And we may even want to change the from range because we're seeing it's going, we'll see how negative it goes. Okay, now it's not. So we might even be just like doubling back on ourselves. So I'll hit bypass and see how that acts. But that's definitely hitting a bigger range now. I'm just kind of topping and bottoming out. So we'll leave it like that for now. I'm going to click on level. And since we've got all of our bits here at the end, and the modifiers merged together, I can grab that invert, and I'm just going to drop that in there and hit do export. And you'll see invert has a lot of weird spaces, so that's something where we might want to just make that a square wave. You can just change that over here in the LFO. And since we have these LFOs going at different speeds, you're kind of getting this interesting interplay where it's not the same every time it loops around. You get some randomness to it. And with it set to a square wave, you can just go ahead and skip that math because we don't need to range it anywhere. And, once you're looking at it, this is where it's nice to see each step. is we can see what the numerical output of the math operator is, and we can see what the numerical output of the limit operator is here. So we can see that now I'm getting 0.225, which is dropping us at this in-between of the invert. If I bypass the math, you'll see now what I'm getting is straight out of the LFO, and it's just 0 to 1. So it's just flipping back and forth. And you probably want to keep that, you know, slow. Slower. Cool. So far we've just been kind of working with these are just, you know, images so far, so not even video. I can switch this out for a video. By just clicking the file here. And once you're playing with a video, you have a speed control here. Very dependent on what kind of codec the video is using. I think in this case it's pretty smooth. Some compressed video codecs really don't like being sped up, slowed down, or reversed, especially reversed. If you look up Touch Designer video formats, they'll tell you they prefer like HapQ, and you can look into all the formats. The fun thing about video compression and being super weird about being played backwards is to compress the video, they use the difference in pixels to play forward instead of having each frame be a discrete thing. They just kind of change the pixels that move forward. So when you move backwards, it just doesn't, it just stutters out. But theoretically you could, since I'm pretty sure they put this in HapQ or something, I can do that middle click. Doesn't say the format. It should say the format, right? Oh well. What's that? I can't hear you.
Is there a reason you can't just look at the file that it's started in?
Wait, I can't.
Is there a reason that you can't look at the file it's started in?
Oh.
In the
I mean, yeah, I mean, you could open it in VLC too and find, I think if we were to,
In the past, to get video to play good, I've had to convert everything to have files. Is that something I should keep doing if I want?
yeah, I would definitely pull up the documentation page for Touch Designer's video formats and what they prefer. But I mean, if you're just playing a video forward, like this is fun because, you know, I can say speed -1 and now it's playing backwards. As you can see, I'll make it -0.5 so it's easier to see it count down. Right now it's counting down instead of up.
But if you're doing anything other than just playing the video forward, I guess at the normal frame rate, you probably should.
Right, you should have a high quality video format. Yeah, I know this works just fine with like H.264s if I'm just like triggering video clips. It's totally fine. One of the things I have going on in the museum is super simple. I barely even call it an exhibit, but it's just video files, and then it imports the subtitles, so you can change the language subtitles by hitting the language of the subtitles by pressing buttons on the touch screen. Super simple, but I'm pretty sure those videos are just H.264 or just MP4 format. They wouldn't play backwards, but they don't need to. It's just a video player. But that was like the easiest way I found to switch the caption languages, which is nice. It's just overlaying in there. Yeah, so I mean, there's video files, but we're still at the point where we're just kind of manipulating files. I'm gonna delete the jelly bean. Actually not. I can right-click this this video operator, and you can click on Change Op Type. And of course, again, because you know we're in top space, it will only give you the valid ones that you can use. So I'm going to click Video Device In, and I have NDI installed on here, so it defaults to that for some reason. If it doesn't just say integrated webcam, or if you don't have a webcam, then, you know, we get the idea. But now we have a webcam input. Oh, I'm using my operator there. That's not fun. There we go. I want to have my image reversed and filtered through a banana. That's exactly what we're going for here. Yeah. So I'm just going to kind of...
How did you change the op type? You just...
Yeah, right-clicked on the movie file in, and then there's a change op type option about halfway down there. Yeah. So that's a convenient way to do it, just without having to rewire everything.
I would guess that would also be nice for like optimization, where you can change from something like
What is it for
like
the...
a composite to the actual operation you're using.
Yeah.
What is it for the webcam? What's it called?
Video device in.
Oh.
Yeah. And then, you know, of course that applies to if you have a camera with I want to say FireWire, but it'll all be USB at this point. Or if you have a video capture card, you know, it'll show up in this list. Or like I use NDI video sometimes, which is like video over LAN. So you can bounce video around a network that way, and you can pull that in as a source. OBS virtual camera, same thing, you can be using OBS. And similarly, video device out, I'll just make a bit of that. Actually, that's for like Blackmagic. I want video stream out. That has options for sending directly over the network. Ooh, what did I do? There we go. And see what's happened now that I accidentally... Oh, I know what happened. I bumped my laptop and the webcam died. That's my point about this webcam not working.
I think the thing that if you bypass it, it switches also.
Yeah, so I'm gonna, oh, not view. I'm just gonna move this back to, you can leave it on your webcam. You can, you know, do whatever you like with yours. I'm just gonna switch this back to a movie file since my webcam is not stable today. That's fine. All right, so I'm kind of bored of this network, but we don't want to delete it. We can just save it for later. And this goes back to the whole thing of like being able to containerize. So I'm just going to click outside and hit U for up. And we actually did leave that in a container at the beginning, right? And if you didn't, sorry, I'm kind of jumping through. So you're just in project?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what you can do,
Or above that.
you're on project/container one?
None of that.
What I was going to say is, say we were just at the project level right now. Just cut and do this from the beginning. So we're at the project root, right? We've got our stuff here. And delete this old container. So you can right click and drag. We'll just select all of this stuff and right click outside of the network, just in the background, and you can hit collapse selected, and it just drops that into its own base, which is like a container, but it doesn't have any specific output to it. So I'm going to name that like banana. It's fine. So if you hover over it and hit I, or I think you have to select it, hit I, right? Yeah. So you see we've still got our network in here. We've got this null at the end, but we can actually do something fun with this. We can just leave this self-contained. I'm going to right click at the output of the null, and I'm going to add an out. And then hit U to go back up in the structure. And now you'll see this actually has an output. It doesn't have any inputs or outputs until you add one. So you see now we have a purple output. And if I hover over it...
We have to put it out on the null?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you could also replace the null with an output, but just for good practice, I mean, the null doesn't add any processing overhead, so it's just fine to add that from the null. It's good practice. Yeah. And similarly, if you wanted to manipulate something in the container, you could add an in. We could add an in chop. And one that starts with an I. There you go. If I go up, I haven't connected it to anything yet, but now we have a way to pipe into it, and you don't have to deal with everything in this network. So obviously, as you start getting multiple scenes or different things that you want to have happen, it makes a lot of sense to start containerizing all this. So if I wanted to add the, I don't know, I don't want to do anything with the end, but we'll just leave it there and we can patch it later if we want. So go up, and now we've just got this nice clean container at the root of the project, / project one. If I hover right over here, right at the edge, there we go, you actually see a tiny little video preview of what's happening. That's nice. So let's see, I don't think I can do this with bases, but I can do it with containers. Yeah. Okay. So you can actually add a null out here. We'll just leave that so we have one output. So let's start a fresh one. And I'm going to make this a container because it's a little, has a little more control over it. So I'm going to hit tab, go to comp and container. And we got this nice blank slate, so we can just go in here. And let's kind of play around with some more top stuff. So I don't know if my video device in is going to start cooperating or not. Yeah, it doesn't like that. That's fine. I'll use a video. You can use your webcam if you like. It doesn't matter. Movie file in. Just pick a nature one here. Sure. Trees. Not a whole lot of movement in these. That's my only issue with them. I think there's a water one in here. There we go. That has some movement to it. So I'm going to add a null at the end. Just right click right off the bat. And we can adjust for that ratio. And let's see, we've got levels, we've got all sorts of things we can do. I'm just going to add a level here, and I'm going to go to RGBA, and that's red, green, blue, and alpha. And you'll see if I turn down the high alpha, it starts becoming see-through at the end. But if you turn up like the low red, it adds the minimum amount of red, it turns up the minimum amount of red. If you pull down the high red, it takes the red out of the video. So we can just kind of make a stylistic thing out of this. Post, don't mess with the gamut. You can do whatever you like. It's just a creative tool here. Just kind of make it contrasty. That's fine. Cool. So we can do video content one way. We can also just do generative content. So I'm just going to add a ramp. And this will be just giving us, this black to white gradient. And I'm going to hit the middle click here and see, okay, so when you make a ramp, it defaults to 256 by 256. There's a couple ways to change this. So when you have your ramp selected, you'll see we've got all this color control for the gradient, and output you can actually composite it with the input. But every operator has a common tab, and if I look at the video one, look at the common tab, you see the resolution set to use input because the video will automatically tell it that it's 720. But looking at this ramp, it defaults to 256 by 256. So you can click the triangle next to it here, and you can set your resolution. You can also just type it in. I'll say 1280 by 720. The free version is limited to 720p again, so it actually kind of lets you get away with it. I could say like 1080, but it'll just tell me on the output that it downgrades it to 720. Yeah. So now we've got this super interesting black to white gradient. That's fine. So let's give it a little color. So the gradient controller here is a little weird, but if I click on these little flags, or if I click off, there's a center one. You know, I can create more. So I can click black, and we'll bring up these saturation values so the color comes back into it. Oh, which one am I? Oh, there we go. And if you, this is the weird part of it. If you have more of these flags than you want, you can click and just drag off of here and it gets rid of them. So I'll just leave it at 3 right now. So I'll take that center one, we'll say we want that to be blue. So just kind of pull up these values until you get a color that you like. Does that make sense? I know it's a little fidgety there. It's not quite as good as doing something like Photoshop to color control it. And you'll see that we're going horizontally here. You know, this is directly correlated there. So if I hit type, we can do vertical. Now we've got a top to bottom. We also have radial and circular. So I'm going to make a circular one. And you'll see we've got that kind of hard line where we've got white at this end and black at this end. So when it starts over, it's just a hard cut in the color. So then we have phase down here, and that's where in the gradient it lands. So if we just grab this phase knob, see, we start getting this cool effect. And then the period is how, you know, we turn the period up to 10. You'll see this is a much slower phase. But we still got this hard edge, so I'm going to move this flag over a bit. I'm going to move that in. And now if I pull the period down, and you can actually just drag this out, so we'll just have 2. So you just take the one from the right end and center it. And then we can do that. So now we got this cool kind of hypnotic effect, right? Make it smoother. Now, what we can do, since we want to move this, we could do the LFO again. We could do, you know, just any type of control. I'm going to show you one line of Python that we could do. So you know how we have this plus sign at the left of each parameter. So I'm going to click the plus sign next to phase. And right now, and you see these are your different options. This is a constant. You can set it to an expression, an export from another operator, or a bind, which is actually a two-way export, which is cool but more advanced. So what I'm going to do, and this will automatically switch types, so I'm just going to delete the number here, and I'm going to type in ABS for absolute, and then capital T time. So absolute time, just with that capital T, because it's camel case, like a lot of coding. So your first word is lowercase, and then, you know, they use that to different, kind of delineate where there's multiple words squished together in a line of code. So abs time dot seconds, so that'll be the unit of time. And when I hit enter, it's just using the time from the from Touch Designer. And by the way, the bottom line here with the timeline, it does just go in a loop. You can have a whole animation sequence where it's bound to that time, but usually this just goes in a loop. And if you hit spacebar, see that you can start and stop the whole timeline, videos playing and everything. So if you're doing a whole show design, you'll have to get into this, but for what we're doing, time just runs on, so that's fine. So this is a little bit fast, and what you can do with these expressions, it's super simple. We can just do some math with it. So after abs time dot seconds, I'm gonna space, asterisk for multiplication, and say 0.5, and that should half the speed. If I say like 0.2, it's even slower. Get nice smooth. Is that making sense? Got your variable going? Cool. Or not really a variable, just a moving constant, something. Yeah.
I gotta go pay my parking, but I'll rewatch the next
Oh yeah, for
few
sure.
minutes
Cool.
on the screen later.
Yeah. So we could kind of go back to that initial demo. Just going to deactivate the viewer there and reactivate this null at the end so we get this video. I might brighten this up a bit too. There we go. That's something. So let's say we want to take this ripple and make it a ripple. You can right click after the level here before the null on the wire, say insert operator and displace. And you see we got this error. It needs a source to tell it what to displace by. So I'm going to drag our ramp in here as the displace source. And now we have something that's just way out. So you'll see we've got our displace weight set to 1 on both of these by default, which is enough so that it's taking this video and pushing everything by a ton. Another thing, you'll see we've got X and Y values here. You know, and if we click and hold on this one, say on the X value, we get this operator, or this, whatever you would call it, this pop-up that lets us move the numbers, right? But only at one at a time. But what's cool with these with multiple fields, so we've got this X and Y, I can hover over the title here, it says displace weight, and click and hold there, and I can move both of them at the same time. Super nice. So move that down to 0.1, and now you can see what it's doing. It's kind of rippling through as the lighter values hit, it displaces more. So if we were to take this ramp and click the blue, and we'll just move it back to white, and you'll see that the brighter the value, the more it moves. But we can leave it blue. And we can, of course, make that more drastic. So now we're kind of going back to this value, and you can see those sharper lines cause it to distort more. And as we hit the edge of the video, it's actually just grabbing that last pixel and stretching it. So you can get all sorts of unexpected effects out of this. We can go negative, go the other direction. So that's what's happening, is it's grabbing that last pixel out of the video and just stretching it and distorting it. Super fun. And you can pick which color channel is controlling it. So if we say green, there's some green in here. If I say red, It's not really going to do much on the horizontal source because this is mostly blue. But you can mess around with each value as you like. Yeah. But we've done displays before, so we'll just kind of look at some other things that we can do. I'm going to bypass this level and we'll get a nice, that one's pretty, I can delete the level too. So we'll just go back to pulling in a movie and doing something fun with it. I'm going to grab something a little more colorful. There we go. And what we can do is we can kind of apply our color values from here to the color values from here. So I'm going to right click, insert operator, and we'll say lookup. And, you know, second input required. So we're just going to click on the output of ramp, go into the input, and now you'll see that it applies these relative values to the video based on what's happening here. So you can play around with this and make it more in range of what we want, or maybe make this green, take the black, and we'll bring up some of the saturation and value, maybe make it purple. All right. There we go, a little pink, pinkish purple and some green, or we could just change that back to blue. Maybe it should be a little darker. You know, a lot of this is just creative, messing around with colors. But now we have something that's kind of this cool affected video. And you could also be doing that with your webcam or camera on the performance stage, or really any input you want. So let's see. Here. And likewise, I could hit up and go all the way back out and just kind of grab. I'm just gonna copy on this banana, go up, and we'll go into our second containers. We'll just call it nature. Just gonna double click or hit I to go in, and let's paste that banana there. And I'm going to insert an over. I want that on the bottom. I'm going to swap that out. And we're going to put the banana over. There we go. So one of the other things we can do is right click after the banana. So we're not manipulating both parts of the video, just the banana part, right? And I'm going to type in transform. And so transform basically gives us translate, rotate, scale. So if I were to start grabbing, you know, that'll take us right out of the frame. Smaller scale, there we go. So you got your x-axis here, your y-axis. So you can start moving elements around the screen, especially when you have something with a transparent background like that, right? Rotate, I'm just gonna go ahead and add abs time, capital T dot seconds, times 0.4. Yes. Oh, actually, it is working. It is rotating, but rotation works in 360 degrees, right? So that's like 0.4 seconds per second to a degree is like not very big, so it's moving very, very slowly. So we're going to say time.seconds times 10, and now we got something. So you can say 20, speed it up a little bit. Now we have rotating banana. And I can click and hold on scale, and we can uniformly, plus it out.
That time is real time, not time code, correct?
Right, you can assign the time. This is just in real time, but you can link it to SMPTE time or to an external timeline. I haven't really done it too much, so not sure. But we can do the same thing with our layer here. Going to insert a lookup. So it'll be looking up color values from something else. And I'll just add a constant. We'll say if I bring that into the lookup, ooh, that's just everything. That's fun. That creates a problem because it's messing with the alpha, right? So now the whole thing is white. So let's not do that. Let's do the same problem. So what we want to do, because we're just adding a color lookup, so of course everything outside of the image is just going to turn into a full alpha, which means there's no transparency behind it. So I'm going to blend this. We'll add a composite before the transform here. And I'm going to add our ramp in there. And we're going to, the other way you can change this. So we had the common tab where you could change the resolution. But also this input, we can drag our image that's the right resolution out to that, and it automatically inherits the input. So now you see we've got this, this is multiplied by the ramp. So if I were to do that, there we go, a blue banana. Or make it green. Cool. That's right, we can delete that lookup there. It's very, very artistic right there. It's just similarly, I'm gonna add a null to the end. Oh, I'm sorry, that already is a null. I'm going to add an out, right click on that, output, and hit U to go up, and now we have our video there, so I can add that in the top level. Again, we can right click and say cross, and add our other output to it. Now we can use our two different networks there. Now the reason I chose a container instead of a base for this is you can set the layout and the look. So let's see, I think it's in look. Yeah, background top. So this kind of goes into folder structure, but to keep it simple, if I go into this nature and look at, okay, our out top is called out1. So I'm gonna go up. And in look of the container, background top, I'm going to hit // and that'll be the inside directory, and say out1. And now we've got that background there, which just makes it a little easier to see what's going on. Let's see. So, we've got a couple of those. I'm just going to go ahead and highlight everything, turn those viewers off. I want to kind of play around with 3D space here and creating a particle network. So let's make a new container, comp container. I'm just going to call that 3D stuff. We'll go in there. Cool. So this time we're going to play with SOPs, which are surface operators. Those are your 3D objects. So I'm going to start picking a sphere. And you'll see it's kind of got these light reflections. You know, not too much you can do with it. I mean, you can activate the viewer and you can rotate this, and you can see the axes moving, which is nice. But being a sphere, it doesn't really give you a whole lot to work with there. You know, so I'm going to deactivate that, and it's the easiest way to kind of show this. Let's add a noise to it, and this might slow things down pretty quickly. So now what I've got is it's still a sphere, but now we're just adding noise to each of the points that makes it up. But I'm going to go back to our sphere and kind of show you what's happening here. Parameters. What is the word I'm looking for?
I don't know why.
Which?
Oh, my noise isn't showing the blobby sphere, it's showing some weird data.
Is it disconnected? Let's see what you got.
Maybe I needed to make a new window.
Let's see what you got. I was.
Point position? No. Sparse?
Display options, that's what I want. There it is. Okay. Well, yeah, we can get rid of the noise for right now. We'll just do the sphere. So if you right click on it and click display options, which was eluding me for some reason, you'll see it gives you all these markers for points. If you hover over this, it'll show you point numbers, all points. If I click point numbers, you'll see pretty quickly how busy it gets. But it will actually show you in order each of the points. So I'm going to unclick that and just click points. And now you can see that the sphere is actually made of Bezier curves between all these different points. I can show you the same thing. I'll add a box down here. We'll actually get to use that too. Let's see, activate. Oh no, I'm sorry. I want to activate that. So right click, hit display options and add points. Now activate this viewer and you'll see like how much simpler a cube is, of course. You got, basically a point on each corner, right? Super low number of points. When you've got your sphere, you've got a bunch more, and you can actually see, you can change the type of primitive, and primitives are 3D objects. We're going to leave everything mesh today. But if you click detail, you'll see rows and columns, and that's actually the number of, you'll see as I increase the rows up to 40, we'll make it equal. And if you pull it down to like 3, see that we pretty quickly get kind of a diamond, right? But I'm going to set that to, we'll just say 20. I'll tab to the next field and say 20. So now we got this nice sphere. Good number of points, right? 200 points. Yeah. And you can, when you're doing the active viewers in these, you can manipulate each shape to just get a feel for it, and it's not going to affect the output render, which we'll get to in a minute. So what I'm going to do is, I'll just right click on the output of the sphere. We'll add that noise again. And see if you've got that coming up this time. Might work for you. And if not, we don't need to do the noise. I could always bypass it, and we'll show you a couple different ways.
I don't know why it's doing this crazy thing.
Yeah.
Is it noise in the stops, or is it a different noise?
It's the noise stop, yeah. Yeah, that's what
Mine doesn't look like that at all. It looks like this.
is it connected?
Yeah.
That's weird. Yeah, activate your viewer, the last one over there, and hover over the page. Okay. Oh, I think it's your render flag, that second one. It's also on the Mac. That's
What?
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, Touch Designer is PC native. It runs on Macs, but I know it has some issues with 3D rendering.
Maybe it won't do this.
It might not, just 'cause the GPU.
Okay.
I'm not. I haven't used it on Macs enough to know like where the limitations hit. But we can just do it with a sphere. I'll just keep both options. I can.
You know what? All they did was change the window a little bit and then it fixed itself.
There you go.
If you try to shrink it down too far, it does that, I guess.
I see. Yeah, weird rendering stuff all the time.
Oh, weird.
But I can do this both ways. I can hit bypass and we can look at it as a sphere. So so when you're looking at these previews, you know, when you're looking at your viewers, you can look at each object. We can even combine objects, but the point is like this isn't actually outputting as a 2D texture. It's actually showing as a 3D object. So to get this like onto a screen properly, we need to render it. And there's kind of a process for this. So I'm going to put a null at the end of the chain here because we might want to mess around with our SOP some more. I'm just going to bypass noise for now just in case things get weird. But so at the end of the null, I'm going to right click and we're going to go to our comps. And I'm going to click geometry. And geometry gives you kind of the overall output. If you just make and this is kind of the shortcut, like going from the end of your surface chain here, because if you just hit geometry with nothing in it, it gives you a donut, which is nice. I like donuts. It's fine. But again, since this is a comp, like we can go inside of it and see what's happening. So I'm going to hit I, and it's just pre-generating with a torus shape, which is a donut. So, I mean, you can hit that and delete, and we can go to our SOPs and add an in, and go up, and now I can, you know, take our box and put it into the geometry. But there are far less shapes, or there are far less steps when you just add the comp from the end, add your geometry comp from the end. So we've got our geometry. And what we want to do is get this into 2D space where tops live, right? Because that way we can do kind of fun graphics with it. So we're going to hit tab and go to our tops and hit render. And you'll see we've already got kind of nothing. So it says no camera comp found. So rendering results are undefined. So we're also going to need a camera. And now you see we've got this sphere, but it's just a black object because there's nothing to really tell it what to do. So the third part of this is a light. So when you're rendering 3D objects to 2D graphics, you'll need the geometry to handle the shape, the camera to pick your view, and then a light source to illuminate it. You don't always need a light. If you pick just a flat color material, it will still render. But the colors work, you know, I mean, the overall effect works better. Like you can see the light source reflected. And if I activate the viewer on the light, you'll see I can, as I change the angle, I can rotate around the planet here. And change the angle of the lighting. And so geometry, see I can go into our SOP and move the sphere like off the screen. Has nothing to do with where it shows up once it renders. I'm gonna hit H to home it back there. But geometry would be where you move it. So if I activate this viewer, oh, I'm sorry, camera is where you do that. I'm backwards today. There we go. So your camera is basically, you know, I mean, as humans, we can only look at a 3D object from one angle, right? So your camera is going to be how you do that. So as I'm looking, it looks like the light's changing, but it's actually because our position around the sphere is changing. But if I right click and drag, you can pan. So we can move that around and we can scroll to zoom in and out. I'm just gonna home that and then scroll a little bit because that's small. There we go. And if I reactivate the noise, you'll see got a little more fun. But I'll deactivate that noise, and I'll say what I want to do. It's like let's rotate this planet, right? So we've got rotate, and you see there's 3 fields here. So we've got X, Y, and Z axes, right? We'll say abs capital T time dot seconds, and it looks like nothing, right? Actually, it's going to be in degrees, so let's multiply that by 10. And now you'll see, you can see these points moving, but being that our camera and our light are in the same place, and the sphere is uniform all the way around, we're not seeing any movement. If I had noise, our noise is now moving, but it's also chaotic and, you know, can't really tell that it's moving on the y-axis. So I'm gonna, oh, forgot to tell you, basic interface thing. I've got my box here. I can click on the output and drag, and I can actually replace the existing cable by hovering over it. So then similarly, let's say rotate abs time dot seconds times 10 maybe. Cool. And similarly to how you move the object in space, you know, by using these transforms, hold that, as you would move it in the active viewer, you know, what we're doing here is rotating on an axis, so I can just kind of click this and say, let's give that a little angle so it's more apparent that it's rotating, right? So far this is just, you know, plain material. It doesn't really have anything going on. I'm going to hit tab, and we'll click on matte, and that's for material. I'm going to click on wireframe. That'll be a good start. So wireframe by default kind of does this. It creates links between the points, so you can kind of get a, you know, it's a vintage 3D feel of of what's happening with your material. So if you click on Geo, there's a whole bunch of options with your geometry. You'll see there's a transform on there. Instancing is what we're going to do next. It's really cool. But render, if I click on render and drag this material, so we've got our matte or wireframe matte, I'm going to drag that to the material field. And you can just grab the whole operator, because we're not just using a variable, we're referencing the operator. So you can just grab this whole operator and drag it and drop it there, and it doesn't move its location on the screen. But now you'll see we've got a cool wireframe setup. And similarly, if I can just click and swap back to the sphere. Now you can see it rotating. We can change the color of the wireframe, you know, do things like that. The other kind of materials you can get to, so I'm just going to add another matte. Pbrs are physically based renderings. I'm not sure if there's any that are in the preset. You can map materials. So like, you know, when you're playing a video game and there's like a metal texture and the light hits it, or there's like a rough texture, when you're doing texturing things that look realistic, that's when you use the physically based renderings. I'm going to use a Fong, not a Fong sprite, Fong. And Another thing is you don't have to necessarily go into the geo and do that. I can just drag the Phong directly onto the geometry, and it'll give you a pop-up of what parameter you want to assign it to. So I'm going to assign it to material, and now we're kind of back to this default, but you can apply different colors to it. You can also apply textures here. So we might go back and make a texture in top space, so we can generate something in top space and apply it. So far we've got this thing that's just, you can't tell that it's rotating because it's just a sphere. So let's think about what we could do with the top to make it look textured, right? So one of the ones we haven't played with yet is noise. So when you do a noise top, you get this fun black and white image, right? You can turn off the monochrome, you can get full color. It has a lot of options, and these are just fun to play with. Like, you get all sorts of different types of noise out of it. You can get it down to like, I'm just going to leave it monochrome for now. You can get it down to like TV noise, or you can get like a very specific kind of cloudy look. So if you turn your harmonics down to 1 and kind of set the period up a bit, we get this kind of cloudy feel to it. You can mess with the other things, harmonic gain, kind of soften it up, kind of make it a little more wiggly. Oh, another thing about the interface that you can do is if you're messing with like this whole thing of options and you've kind of like lost track of what you've messed with, this little target here at the very corner, if you click this, it will condense down to only the options that you've changed. So all the defaults will disappear, so you can see exactly what you've changed. So that's just kind of handy when you get lost, especially when you're like 30 parameters into messing with something. Of course, if you go too far off, you can always delete it, re-add the operator, and, you know, work from. All the operators generally have same presets. But yeah, so we got this little texture here. I'm going to do the offset a little. Let's see. I want to soften up the black parts here. All right. So look at our Phong, and we have click, click, click. Okay. We've got these map files, right? Color map, normal map, diffuse, specular. So I'm going to take our noise, and I'm just going to drag it into the normal map. And now we have something happening. It's pretty drastic. So we might want to, first of all, I'm going to go to common. I'm going to up our resolution to 1024 by 1024. That'll just make it a little, because otherwise it can get a little pixelated. But, you know, this is where it really pays to just kind of play around with it. So you can just make something like that. And this gets, you know, when you get into 3D graphics, there's just a lot of complexity to it. But add a height map. And I see that the light is kind of affecting what we've got going on here. Cool. It's like a mint chocolate chip planet. That's what I'm going with. That's fine. Cool. All right. So let's see. We've still got our box rotating here. So this is one 3D object, right? Now what if you want like a bunch? I mean, you don't want to copy this 100 times because your processor will just stop. But there's shortcuts to it. So let's take our sphere out of the equation as the shape. So I'm going to go back in and bring this box to our null. I'm going to delete the noise, but let's clean this up. I'll put the box there. I'm going to bring the sphere down here. Now, I'm going to click Geo, and this is fun because you can You can do this instancing with different types of data. You can use a chop input, you can use top input, or you can use what we're using in this case. I wanted to kind of stick around in this 3D space. So we're going to instance this cube for each point on the sphere. So clicking on the geometry and going to the instance tab, we'll click instancing on, and now we've got all these options. There's actually 3 pages of options, so you can like vary color by instance and everything like that. So, but we're just going to start with translate. Translate will get us 1 cube per point on our sphere. So I'm going to grab just our entire sphere, drag that to translate op, and we'll see we've got translate X, Y, and Z. So automatically it's not going to do anything, but if we click these arrows down here, you'll see these are the here's the points, the P0, P1, P2, and the normals, which gets further into 3D than we're really going to talk about today. But so just X, Y, and Z is going to be P0, P1, and P2. So I'm just going to click P1, and you see we've already got insanity here. Sorry, P0 for X, and then P1, P2, just go in order, and that works. P2. Okay, let's see, so the first thing we're going to want to do is bring the camera out a little bit. And you see kind of the problem that we've run into already is once you add up all these cubes, you've got a cool shape, and the light is affecting it. You know, you can see the edges. Sure. But, you know, it's making this huge solid shape, right? So we can click on the box, and I'm going to go down to our scale here. And we're going to scale this down until we have, discrete cubes in a circle, rotating. So each one of these is also like rotating, each box is rotating as I set in here. It's supposed to be like by 100. See, now we've got each of these cubes rotating as the sphere itself rotates. As those points are all moving around, each one is rendered onto a point. And because we're running the cubes into the geo, we're just using the sphere as the instancing control, so the sphere's not rendering as well. But what we could do if we wanted, this render, and you'll get this little warning message sometimes with these. It'll say a mat is normal mapping, so if it's, sorry, I'm going to move this wireframe. So this phone wants to map to normals. I'm not going to go into all the details of it, but it doesn't have tangent attributes, so they can be created with attribute create. So before the null here, I'm just going to move our box out, right-click, insert, and just attribute create. Hit that, and then you just get 2 options for that, as compute normals and compute tangents. So if I compute tangents, that error message goes away, and you'll see also now it knows how to compute those shadows a lot better. So things are feeling a little more realistic. Let's see, if I move my camera a little bit, move the light. Cool, so now we've got some kind of fun, drastic lighting things happening and movement. And so we're not limited to the one geometry. The render can render multiple geometries. So I'm just going to, clicking our sphere, I'm just going to copy and paste it. So we have I pasted the render, and then it split. Click it, copy and paste. So we know this sphere is scaled to 1, right? Radius is the scale parameter on the spheres. So I'm going to make this one, I'm just going to click on radius so we get this pop-up and just make it like 0.8. And I'm going to right-click and add another geometry comp. And now we have another sphere in the center, right? And I think that one would look cool with a wireframe. So let's do that. Just drag that right onto the geometry and hit material. And now we got this kind of layered thing. And change the color of that, maybe more blue. Right? Something, somewhere in there. Sure. So now we've got this layer thing. You notice we still have a transparent background because we're only rendering the objects, not necessarily the whole scene. So as usual, we can just composite that. And I don't know, let's add a video file back in. So we'll do movie file in. And let's just pick, what's the water one for? Yeah. I'm gonna turn off my viewer on the render and turn it on the, actually, let's add a null after the composite. And I'll turn my viewer on here. So let's see, oh, that's kind of cool. The water is affecting the layers here because it's multiplying, but it's not giving us a background. So I'm just gonna make this an over for now. And let's, if this gets hard to like see the wires and everything, just turn it off and bring up, bring up your operator. Or especially if you're working on like two screens, right click on your end of the chain and just click view. I'll give you a window. You can just drag this out to your other screen, or you can keep it up here in the corner. Another thing you can do in the interface is you can split. So you could say like split left, right. This gets a little bit too much on my laptop, but let's see, where's the thing for that? Oop. Split, and then if you click the arrow at the left of this split division, you can make this top viewer. Just, oh, that doesn't drag. It's a pain. Let's see. Yeah. We'll skip that. But yeah, if you click view, you can, add the second thing out here. I think the movie file looks pretty funny, so let's level it. Something weird. There we go. Something. So is that making sense with the instancing? Okay.
I'm curious, once he has something like this that you like,
Mm-hmm.
how then do you save it or record it?
Yeah, okay, cool. Definitely. Let me just pop this to and I'm just gonna make this a black background for now. Post, bright is just 0. Cool, all right. So yeah, let's say we wanna save this as a movie file. We could use it in VDMX or Grand VJ or anything like that. So we'll right click on this and we'll say movie file out. And you can pick, you can pick an image. You can use this to export images, export movies, export sequences of images, which helps with the play backwards thing. And then your codec, which, we could just say, oh, we could use HapQ. HapQ files are big. So you just pick like an MPEG-4, and if you click the plus here, it will give you the save location, so you can, we'll just keep it to the desktop. And then, and then this record button here, when you flip the record switch to on, it starts recording the output. So let's see. Yeah. So if I hit record, it'll run, and stop recording, and then it should be on my desktop as like TD movie out. Yeah, there we go. Cool. And the fun thing is these buttons as well are controllable. You can program, you know, you can hook into the controls for anything, which is great, fantastic. So the other part of this is if you want to, well, hey, let's just add an out here, right? Add an out, and we can go up. And now we have, I'm gonna look at my viewer. I'll say, I think that was out one, right? So / out one, cool. Okay. I'm gonna add a null here too. This is kind of redundant because I can just have the players coming from any of these. There's also a multi-cross. I can't remember. Oh. So I don't like this one as much. We'll just disconnect that. All right, so we got a couple 720p outputs here. Now let's say you want to perform with this. Like, I mean, I'm mirroring my screen because it's hard for me to run Touch Designer looking this way. But let's say you've got your HDMI to your projector, and that's your performance output, and then you're running it from your laptop here. So. Actually, don't want to do it that way. I'm just going to add a null at the end of here. So that's what we've got right now. This is Banana Planet. Cool. Yeah, that's a nice layer. I was definitely going to the color scheme today. Cool. All right. So the best way to approach that is to use a window comp. So say window. Now what window does is it lets you take any operator, so we'll take the null at the end of our chain here, and we'll drop that into window operator, or we can just drop it in there and say window. So this will be our output, and we can control just about everything about it. We can specify what monitor it goes on. So your index would be 0 is usually like your built-in, and 1 would be your HDMI out. Sometimes you have to test it, you know, but you can force it to a particular video output. You can have the size come from the top, or you can have it fill the screen. Which, if you've done your work properly, and it's in the right resolution, you should be able to use the native. You know, the automatic from the top. But in this case, if you're using a 1080p projector and you're using the free version, you're at 720, I'm just gonna make it fill. And then what you'll do when you're ready to play on that screen is you'll hit open as perform window. And you'll see, since we have that native resolution.
Oh, okay. So you can kind of, if you're mirroring, you can send that to the projector and then you can keep working.
Right, exactly.
Designer.
Exactly. So you can be performing, and building interfaces is the other fun part of this. So you can build a whole custom interface, run it with a MIDI controller, and have different visuals running on the screen.
Right, you can control all these parameters with
Exactly.
an external MIDI controller.
Yeah.
So that's the dream, right?
Right.
Okay.
Not that. Oh, sorry. You don't want to hit X on this window. You hit escape. When you're doing, this is called perform mode. The other thing we want to do is, let's see, we got it set to fill. I'm going to turn off borders and turn on always on top. This is just good practice so that, you know, you can say cursor visible never. So if you accidentally move your mouse over to that screen, it won't show up in the venue, you know. Hit perform. Got full screen, no mouse. So you hit F1 to get into perform mode, and then you hit escape to get out of it. So whenever you get in this full screen mode, you can hit escape, and it'll drop the video out there. And of course, it's also not limited to that window. So if you're using like, if you're doing a big venue and you've got 4 projectors and a high-end graphics card and like 4 display port outs, you just set a window for each one and you control it that way.
How does the native mapping work?
Does the what?
The mapping within it.
The MIDI mapping?
The projection mapping within it.
Oh, the projection mapping. Yeah, that was actually going to be the next thing. So I did want to show, you could build your whole projection mapping from scratch, but don't. I mean, unless you have a very, specific, if you're doing that Amon Tobin show with all those cubes, fine. So we're going to open the palette, and the derivative ones, the company, it's all the built-in stuff. There's actually like a bunch of just fun stuff here, and even if nothing else, like, I think Bloom's pretty cool. We could add a tunnel to this. That's fun. All right, a view. Oh, that's awesome. I love it. First of all, these components, they generally have custom parameters on their parameter page. So if we're looking at this, we say the radius. That's fun. That works really well with some spheres. Cool. And the other part of this is they are components. We can go into it and we can see how they built it. So we've got our input here. We've got this default, the second in. So if you don't plug anything into it, you get jelly beans by default. But this is actually in GLSL, and that's shader code. So this is another language you can learn that just talks to the GPU directly. I'm not very good at it at all. I can basically like pick out what the variables are doing and change them, but there's a ton of shader code online. You can translate from Shader Toys, a site that's just a bunch of WebGL. But this is already here for you, so you can do that.
So you can zoom in on all of those and then kind of reverse engineer.
Right, exactly. A bunch of them. Some of them are GLSL, some of them are just, maybe let's see what Pixelate does. We'll go in here. And yeah, you got something setting setting your resolution, but we're coming in. And yeah, there's actually a resolution operator, and it's forcing it down to, and if you pull this open, you'll see it's referencing from Res X and Res Y. And then there's a wet dry mix, which is its own component, which is just kind of a smooth crossfader there. And all these things are just automated all the way down. So now we can do this. We can mix how much of that, and then pixel size, we can just pixelate out. But yeah, you can go in and see how they do everything. And of course, it does get hugely complex. But let's say we wanted to projection map. We'll say this one, and then so you can drag anything anywhere, but it will get super messy. So let's just say, I like that light tunnel, let's keep that. And then we'll have this be, we'll add a null here, keep this consistent. So we got 2 video sources, and say we're aiming a projector at a corner. So there's a built-in, there's a couple different ones. Cam Schnapper I'm not too familiar with. Cantan Mapper I like as a custom, so we can just drag that in. And this is basically a very big component under the hood, but all you need is this interface that's at the top. So its custom parameters are actually, you hit this button to open the Cantan window, and then it has its own tool set. So let's say we're aiming that projector at a corner. Down here you can you click create quad. We'll just draw a square, draw another, and let's say the corner kind of looks like that. Comes out this way, however it does, and then I'll click that square tool again. Oops, that's way too small. Control Z. Click the square tool, make the other half of the corner kind of meet them up there. All right, so say you want to do that. So we've got our two surfaces, and this will, if you toggle the output, and again, this, where is the output here? It's been a minute since I've used this, but there we go. Window options. Okay, so when you click window options, it gives you that same window operator, because it's basically just using that. So you can specify, send this to the projector, and then toggle output, and you'll see this on the projector. So as you're modifying these, you'll be able to like see on the wall, like, okay, here's the corner, and I've matched it up, you know? Of course, it's just showing up on this one because I'm cloning my screens, but. So once you've got that mapped the way you want, you can scroll. I'm just gonna close the palette here to make a little more room. So I can keep Canton open, and I can just grab these nulls that are at the end and just drag and drop them onto the surfaces that I want to use. So it's super cool. So if we wanted to do something, you know, a little projection mappy, I would say, we can just close this for right now. Let's just, that's the phase here. There's time dot seconds. And I can take this and it's reverse mirror, yeah. We could just flip X, and then I'll open this back up. And we'll take the original one here, and the mirrored one here, and now you got kind of a cool projection map pattern. It's like the fastest way I could think of to do that. And you could also, you could kind of copy the same thing, paste it, turn this into vertical, and say we've got the ceiling that we want to do as well. This will get to a weird shape really quick, but if you click the first arrow, you can use this to rotate, so we can make this kind of diagonal. Getting way out in the weeds here, but yeah. Oh, it's going to get out of hand so quickly. Yeah, you'd probably find a more sane way to do this, but you get the idea. You could be doing multiple surfaces like that. Yeah, and you would just toggle your output out to that projector and throw a party. And the other part of this is you see, like, this is just a container. There's a ton of other containers in it and everything. Lots going on, a lot to learn there, so it's fun to mess with. But you see the container itself actually has controls, so if I activate this, you can use the controls from there. So I think like the last thing to cover is that we could say go into our, let's go back to our 3D stuff one, right? So since this is also a container, we could add controls to this. So I'll go in the container, and I'm going to pull the palette back up because this is just easier than building things from scratch. So you got a UI for user interface. There's basic widgets. So we could add, let's say like this slider 3 RGB. So if I scroll in and look at this, like what we've got, I can activate the viewer and see get the color values, right? Cool, so we should be able to take those. And you see we've got this green output here, so we've got our chop out, and that'll be the values of the 3. So I'm gonna add a null just so we can see them here. You see it just like the controls, get our RGB. let's add. I'm just going to move this towards the end and we'll insert, what do we want to do? Something that controls back.
How do you go about designing an interface with the performance?
What's that?
And that's how you design an interface also for performance?
Yeah. Yeah, so this would be how you, you know, these are kind of pre-made parts. If you go into the RGB, you'll see that this is made up of little code returns and all the graphic elements of the slider and everything. So it usually helps to just go from the these presets. But let's see if I can add something with color control here. Say, actually, let's just add it to. Oh yeah, let's add it to the color material for the wireframe if I can. Yeah, okay. So you see if I click on that wireframe material for the inner sphere, you can click on the color and set it manually, but there's 3 fields here, and those are color R, color G, and color B. So those match right up to this. So I'll activate this, this viewer from the sliders, and we will just map those R, G, and B to it. Now you see it's just wherever I left it. I'll pull the slider over here. And we'll say if I slide that up, then now we've got, oh, now I have color control over it. But we're still kind of in here, right? So I'm going to deactivate that viewer. We're going to go up. And now if you look at my viewer for the container, that's moved itself up to the container viewer. And so there's a whole lot you can do, because of course we don't need that preview in the container. We can have the preview right here, or it could just be the output on the screen. So you can fill this whole container with a stack of controls. Like if I just go in, I won't connect it to anything, but I'll just like add a knob from the list. Sure. So okay, we've got a knob component. If I go up, you'll see they're kind of overlapping. So let's take the container and we can do the layout. Let's make the layout like 800 by 800. And that's not doing great for the graphics, but we don't even need the background top. We're just using this as a control panel now. So if we go back to layout, we can say, I'm sorry, it's in children. So all of those knobs and sliders and everything are children elements of that container. So I'm going to click on a line and say top to bottom. And now you'll see we've got these controls. So what I can do is, like, we could be back in Cantan Mapper. We could be running Cantan on our projector. Oop, I'm gonna close this because we're just theorizing here. There we go. We could be running that on the projector. Now, if I right-click on our container with all the controls on it, hit View. Now we've just got this window where we can be manipulating this while, on the laptop screen while the program plays on the projector. And then you can go about MIDI mapping these buttons, and you could control them from an iPad. You could use OSC and touch OSC. You could just be doing that. I would love to have a touchscreen laptop and then just resize these controls so they're big enough. Just be like. So of course it all just gets deeper from there, but of course there's all sorts of things in DATs, but once you start getting into DATs, that's where the programming kind of becomes necessary. But you can find things online to like very easily just kind of pull data from a website or from a sensor, things like that. What's that?
I was looking what was categorized as
Oh, yeah.
versus panel.
Yeah, the panel stuff is what you'll see in like inside these controls. So, yeah. There's just tons of things to experiment with. There's a whole physics engine in here. Pretty dependent on having an NVIDIA GPU for most of it, but
Kind of interesting that DNX is not considered a SR is
yeah.
the same protocols.
Yeah, I mean, you know, once you get into like high-end rendering stuff, it's pretty processor intensive, pretty GPU intensive. But we managed to do some things here, you know, it's cloning objects and everything on this like 6-year-old laptop. So lots of potential, lots of stuff to play with, lots of stuff to learn. There's a ton of good stuff on YouTube now. A few good blogs out there. You know, just searching by topic, being specific, like I want to do something with Connect and Touch Designer, you'll find dozens of videos. So, cool. Well, thanks for coming. It's been a good time. Thanks for tuning in.